Welcome to Galion Rock and Roar, your go-to podcast for all things positive, highlighting people making a difference right here in Galion, Ohio. Today's episode is Galion Rock and Roar's 9th episode, highlighting individuals and groups making a difference. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Hartmann, the superintendent of Galion City Schools. Dr. Hartmann, welcome.
Hi, Marcia. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Good to have you here. And can you please just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the superintendent for Galion City Schools. Before here, I was about 15 years as a head high school principal in Pennsylvania and then up in Northeast Ohio. Recovering social studies teacher. Did my undergrad at Slippery Rock University in Western Pennsylvania, and then did all my other graduate work at the University of Pittsburgh. So I'm kind of from Western Pennsylvania. Yes, that means I'm a Steelers fan, and that's because they're the nearest professional football team. So,
well, we won't hold that against you.
So I'm a first-generation college kid. Mom and dad weren't college educated. Dad was a steel worker. Mom went to school for cosmetology, but never used it, and found herself into things like office management, accounts payable, payroll, that kind of thing. Myself and my two younger sisters are the first-generation college kids in the family, so that's kind of an achievement from a family perspective.
And a message to those listening.
Absolutely.
Let's jump into, what are your goals for Galion City Schools?
The goals for our kids is options. I'm all about giving kids options, opportunities. I was afforded those opportunities as a first-generation college kid. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people in my life that said, hey, let's, you have an aptitude for this, or you have the motivation to do that, and let's clear a path and let you try. And so that's the goal here at a 30,000 foot level. Is we have kids that have gifts. Our teachers are going to unlock those gifts, and then our kids can go and do things with those gifts later on in life. So that's the broad kind of brushstroke. How we do that is probably the subject of this conversation a little bit later.
Yes, I'm sure that's going to pop up. I'm looking at a banner, a poster that says "Courage to Climb."
Yes.
Which sort of ties in, I think, to what you were just talking.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the history behind that?
When I got here, I started asking questions about what does it mean to be a tiger? And the themes that we kept hearing were things like resiliency, grit, determination. And so we gathered all that information. We just kind of sat on it for a while, and then we started some other conversations with teachers, some professional development. We've started working on what we're calling a directional system, what is now termed our courage compass, which is our beliefs and values. What does it mean to be a student and a staff member at Galion City Schools? At the end of the day, we realized that we need to give our kids courage to do things they haven't done before. They need to climb. That grit, that determination, that resiliency all starts with the first step. It starts with having the courage to do something different, whether that's competing against yourself, doing something that nobody else has ever done. Our staff are the ones that provide the conditions for kids to be courageous, for kids to climb and do things they haven't done before. So really, that came from a staff member from a district leadership team meeting at the end of last school year, where our staff was talking about how kids were using the different scaffolds. And you're a former educator, so you know what scaffolds are, but those tools that kids are using to get to the next level. So they've accomplished whatever they need to accomplish in class. They're using the tools to get to the next level. Those tools are called scaffolds. She noticed that our kids were using scaffolds, and they hadn't done that before. And I'm like, well, that sounds an awful lot like climbing. I wonder if tigers climb. And sure enough, they do. They do climb for different reasons. But generally, they climb to get a different vantage point because, what they're trying to accomplish isn't happening while they're on the ground. So they climb into a tree and try to get a different perspective. And that's exactly what we want for our kids.
Love it. Wow, great. Love the analogy and all. I'd like to get a definition of blended learning and authentic learning and how it relates to the goals for next year's schedule?
Blended learning is more of a statutory definition. So if you actually look in ORC and you look up blended learning, it tells you what that is. And it's essentially learning that takes place away from the school. So learning under any other kind of, or in any other location. So that's blended learning, and that's associated with the Monday plan. One of the reasons that we're not able, we chose not to extend our school year or extend our school day is because by statute, by using a blended learning plan and having those Mondays count, we don't have to extend our school year, and we don't have to extend our school day because those Mondays count as instructional hours, as long as we're providing instructional experiences to kids, which we are. So blended learning is kind of the calendar side of things. Authentic learning is more of the curricular side of things. That is your combination of community service, project-based learning, rigor, relevance, relationships. If you're a Bill Daggett fan, merging all of that together into one experience for kids, that is the authentic learning. So our definition of authentic learning is using academic standards to address real life issues. If there's a business in town that needs a mural painted, we're going to call up Haley Bolby in the high school. We're going to say, hey, we'd love to see if your kids can help us do an art thing, right? If there's statistics that need to be run in a business, we're going to give our math department a call and say, hey, we got this that's going on, or hey, we got this technical thing. Maybe Mr. Roston at the middle school would be interested in bringing his kids over and doing something in the STEM environment. It's bridging the academics and real life in an authentic way, so the kids are walking away going, wow, that was amazing. I want to do that again.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
clarifying that. Besides blended learning and authentic learning being involved in the decision to go to a 4-day school week for students, what were other factors that were relevant to making the final decision?
If there was any one element, I don't think we'd be sitting here having this conversation, but there were a couple of things that kind of came together, confluence of different events. The first was, just how much money are we spending on our substitute teachers? We realized last school year it was north of $320,000. And for a district of our size, that's kind of crazy. There's proportions of like our budget and how much we should be spending on subs. 320 is above the norm. And what that means is we're pulling our teachers out of the classroom an awful lot, or our teachers are utilizing their sick and personal days an awful lot. And so all of those have kind of their own little pieces of conversation. So that was the first thing that caught our attention. The second thing that caught our attention was we utilize a continuous improvement process in the district called instructional rounds. We've sent our teachers to Harvard to be trained on that. They joined other educators from across the country. It's a program that I've been familiar with for a while. And that continuous improvement process is structured and it gathers data, and we all take a look at all of our buildings, pre-K through 12, about the quality of what's happening in the classroom. How is the interaction between students and the teacher, students and the content? And that information came back to us and basically said, we have a problem. And our problem is that we're not as engaged with our kids as we could be. Couple that with this year, I started meeting with what we're calling climb committees. And those are groups of kids in the intermediate, middle school, and the primary, or in the high school. So it was me, the school administrators, and a group of kids. And we just talked about school. How's school going? What can we do? How can we do it better? And what we were hearing from our middle school and especially our high school kids was that they're bored. They're not challenged. They want to be challenged more. And so we're having these conversations in our instructional rounds process. We're having these conversations with our kids. And then our staff is saying, listen, we can address this, but we need time to do it, because to switch, to become more engaged, to be more project-based, to be more authentic, to go out in the community and engage in partnerships, that takes time, and we just can't do it in the current structure. So that was the other big kind of second element of it. And then the third element was recruiting students and staff and retaining them, because we have a history of hiring teachers, and anybody in the district knows, they probably know of at least one person who, they were a great teacher, they were hired here, but then after a couple of years, they went home, wherever that may be, Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo. And so we lose them. And we lose them because we're not providing something that's compelling for them to stay. And the same is true with our kids. We outplace about 200 kids that leave us and go open enroll somewhere else. And so we're hoping to get some of those kids back, but we're also hoping to attract other kids to join us as well. And so that's going to be a bit more slow of a process because we're doing something that nobody's ever done. So it's really hard for a family in Ontario to say, I want to throw my hat into the ring with Galion because we haven't done it yet. I imagine this time next year we'll have a very different conversation because I suspect that we're going to have a program that is going to be really interesting and attractive to kids and families. So all of those kind of things came together. If it was any one of those things, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But if there's a way that I can save money and be better stewards of taxpayer dollars, if there's a way that I can engage kids better, if there's a way that I can attract and retain good staff, if I can try to help improve the quality of life with our staff, maybe they won't take as many sick days. So, that all of those little pieces and parts all kind of come together, and we just said we need to do something different. And if for nothing else, we need to try and see how it goes.
The courage to climb.
That's it. Yeah.
You haven't anticipated reaping the benefits of open enrollment yet?
Yeah, we have an increase in open enrollment so far, more than we've had in the past, which is good. But I'm very guarded with kind of, saying mission accomplished for any of this stuff because we haven't done it yet. And even if we maintain our enrollment stability, even if we don't get any open enrollment kids, just the improvement of the efficiency of what we're doing internally. The only reason that a teacher would be out of the classroom Tuesday to Friday would be either for our instructional rounds process or for a sick or personal day. And if I can create a better quality of life and people come here to Galion because they're like, wow, they really prioritize quality of life, then maybe I don't have many teachers taking those sick and personal days, right? So that's the goal, is if we can move all of our IEP meetings, or at least the vast majority of them, if we can move all of our trainings to Mondays, if we can move our TBTs and our BLTs and our DLTs and all the other acronym meetings that we have, right? If we can do all of those on Mondays, then I'm increasing the contact time between teachers and students in the classroom. I'm not pulling them out at random times. And teachers don't want to be out of the classroom either. You were a teacher, you didn't want to be out of the classroom, right? Because it's more difficult often to be out of the classroom than not. So if I can give kids and teachers stability of schedule and pick up all that other stuff that I was talking about, why wouldn't we try it and see how it goes? So that's kind of the goal. Well, any time, any sort of implementation, you generally want it to be on a 3 to 5 year spectrum. Now we exercise the right to kind of, if it looks like we're really having trouble, then we can hit the eject button and we can always go back to the way it was. School has been school for over 100 years, right? It's not going to be hard to switch back if we need to. I don't know if we're going to need to, but the goal is that 3 to 5 year, really 1 to 3 year time period for us, because that first year you're just doing it. You're just trying to figure it out. Year 2, you'll make all of those changes to year 1, and maybe those will work out, right? And then year 3 is really when you end up hitting your stride. A good example of that is the CAP program. This is the end of year 2. They walked into it with a very different view in year 2, and they already have plans on how to make year 3 better, right? So this is kind of the same thing. But again, if it looks like if we're running into major difficulties, yeah, we have the right to change and kind of move back. But all along, we're going to be talking to our stakeholders, our internal folks, to say, okay, what do we need to fix? What do we need to tweak? We're going to be doing that right off the rip, because we need to. There's a lot of moving parts to this, but we have smart people and they're going to be able to do it. And we're going to tweak and adjust as we go along based on whatever the information is it's telling us, the metrics and the data. So, I tell people, yes, we have the ability to go back if we ever want to. I don't know if that'll be the case, because right now at the end of the school year, we're really starting to dig into, graduation just happened and prom is done and state testing is done. Everybody's looking to the next school year. And our staff is becoming, I think, more excited with the possibility of what is available to them on Mondays, and, giving them the time and space to be able to retool what they do and layer in authentic learning experiences. They've never had that before, so And we have teachers that are doing it now, which is the really cool part, right? We have Spanish buddies. Jenna Bollinger takes a group of Spanish students down to the primary, and those high school kids teach the little kids how to do Spanish. That's awesome. Katie Guy is working with Haley Bolby, the art teacher at the high school. They were making up stories as part of their, I think it was a fiction unit, and they were making up characters. Well, then the kids had to draw those characters, and the high school kids made those characters out of clay, and then they were providing those characters to the kids. So, we have different experiences kind of all over the place at the elementary and the secondary level, but we're doing that in spite of a schedule that doesn't really make it easy, because Jenna and the high school people are on a whole different schedule than the elementary people. If Jenna wants to pick up the phone and talk to a teacher at the elementary level to collaborate, well, when's their planning period? When do they even start? When do they end? What time is their day over? We just don't make it easy. So the entire point of Mondays is the fiscal resource component, but that other resource is time. And so if we can just get people together in the same time and space to have the types of conversations they need to have, they're trained people, they're smart folks. We just need to get out of their way and let them do their job. And that's what Mondays are designed to do.
What measures will you take to ensure that academic rigor is maintained despite the reduction in school days?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that instructional rounds process that I mentioned before, that's going to be utilized to a large degree to gauge what's happening in the classroom. And certainly the anecdotal conversations that I have with kids, those climb committees that I mentioned earlier, and just having those conversations. How's it going in the classroom? What's challenging you? What isn't challenging you? All of that anecdotal stuff. And then we have our own internal actual data. So we have the STAR test, we have Acadians, we have some other types of actual testing that we do. And we've been doing that for a number of years. So that'll help us kind of give us that early warning kind of system to see, are we on target, are we not? The other part, though, that is always interesting, and the part that I've had to explain to people as we're talking about this is, what is school nowadays? Because the school that you and I went to is very different than the school that kids go to now. The world is different, the pressure is different. I mentioned the fact that we're pulling these teachers out of those classrooms. There is very much a possibility that if we do this right, we're going to be picking up yardage from a curricular standpoint and from a content standpoint. Because if you do a project well, or you do an authentic learning experience well, you can package and layer in a lot more content with a lot more relevancy and a lot more stickiness that sticks with kids than if you were just sitting in a classroom 5 days a week, right? You can package an awful lot of material and an awful lot of experiences into one session, but you got to have time for the teachers to be able to build that. And so that's the entire point of this program is if we give our teachers the time and space to be able to come up with those things, are they able to maintain certainly where we're at? But you know what? Are they able to pick up some yardage because they're just acting in a more efficient way? They're acting more intentionally and more collaboratively. So kind of on the surface, you're like, wait a second, you're talking about maintaining the same level, if not, increasing the level of coverage, but you're reducing a day. Yeah, on the surface, that seems a little crazy. But if you're more intentional with the time, then that's what's going to happen. And, maybe you're not going to be able to show as many videos in class, right? But maybe we don't have teachers that are out of the classroom either very often because we're able to do all that stuff on Mondays, So, are we able to really zero in on what the essentials are? Are we able to really zero in on those collaborative experiences? That's the goal is, let's try to do that so that we're maintaining, the fidelity with curriculum and lessons and whatnot. Are people concerned about it? Yeah, sure. Again, because we've never done it before. But I think as they start getting into it and they start realizing, hey, if I work with my colleague on this, they can accomplish a lot of their standards and I can too. Maybe it isn't that big of a deal that we initially thought. But again, we haven't done this before.
Right. And I think that's where the thinking is coming from the community
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Sure.
You only know what you know, and what we knew going to school years ago, as you said, is not the same. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that, as doing a positive podcast, I'm excited for positive things to come from this.
Sure. Yeah.
And hopeful that there will not have to be going back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah,
and I
absolutely.
hope that's being felt around.
One of the things, Marcia, is interesting is, because you're a retired educator, you've seen everything in education is a cycle, right? There was the cycle of, hey, if we do block scheduling, that's going to change everything. Hey, if we add technology to things, hey, that's going to change everything, right? And all of that's really window dressing. At the end of the day, what needs to happen is teachers need time and space to do amazing things with kids, to think about it, to plan it, and to do it. And that's what this program and this plan is all about. We're not parking kids in front of laptops. In fact, it's interesting. We've had our kids and our teachers say, you know what, we want to do more hands-on things and more paper pencil things because technology is so all over the place. We're giving kids iPads, and then when they go home, guess what they're getting on? An iPad, right? So they're spending the bulk of their day in front of screens and screen time, and there's all kinds of research on that. So how do we get our kids' hands dirty? How do we get them to do things that are interactive, that doesn't involve, something in front of a screen? And that's the part where we're kind of rebuilding what it is that we do in the classroom. And yeah, is there concern about that? Sure. And that's justified. But the world has changed. And, when you were teaching, when I was teaching, I didn't have to worry about cell phones, right? My marker was if I was boring the kids, everybody all of a sudden had to go to the bathroom at the same time, right? And I just said, oh boy, okay, I guess I'm losing them. Today it's, well, okay, let's get out our phone and start messing around on our phone or on our iPad or whatever, right? So, and we're losing that human connection in the process. So if we can just get back to what it is that we were all trained to do, we were trained to work with kids and use those tools and use those gifts to the best of our ability to help kids do amazing things later in life. But you can't do that in a 40-minute planning period. Not in today's age. And for everybody out there who's like, well, Shelby does it. Well, Lexington does it. Yeah, they're also not a Title I district because our poverty rate is about 70%. And that matters because when you have kids that are coming from homes that are struggling with finances, or food insecurity or generational trauma or whatever it may be, right? Or just having trouble, pinching pennies. That's a whole different level of kid that's walking in our doors that needs extra love, extra attention. And our teachers need to be way more intentional, and they are, about how they interact with those kids. So, Shelby wouldn't be having this conversation. Lexington wouldn't be having this conversation because they have kids that know how to play school. Our kids, they want to play school. They want to do well, but they're not walking in with the tools that an upper income community has available. And our teachers can provide those tools to them, but they need time to really think about it and really do it. So, that comparison of like, well, all these other districts aren't doing it. Why are you so different? Because we are. Because 10 years ago, our poverty rate was 60%. 10 years before that, it was 50%, right? Every 10 years, our poverty rate continues to climb. And so when we talk about things like the CAP program, we talk about Courage to Climb, our kids need options and opportunities to do better in their families, to do better than their parents. That was the entire point with my mom and dad, right? We want you to do better than us. And that's what I have for my son. I want him to do better than me. But you can only do that if people give you opportunities. And that's the whole point here of, our job in Galion City Schools is to give kids opportunities, give kids courage to climb so they can get out of whatever their circumstance is or achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve.
How have you engaged with teachers, parents, and students during the planning process, and what feedback have you received?
Yeah, good question. So we've worked with all of those groups. Our teachers, their feedback has come through a lot of the instructional rounds process. So when we are finished with that, so every building has what's called a problem of practice. And the rounds process goes to check on, are we addressing the problem of practice or are we not? And then they go and they debrief, they talk with their building leadership team about what they saw in the rounds. And then they decide whether they're going to go back to addressing the existing problem of practice, if they need to change it moving forward. And in that conversation, it just seems to always come back to, well, we need time to do this, time to do that. So the time component was pretty much loud and clear. We've heard that. We did brief the staff in December, so I went around to all the buildings, kind of shared them what the plan was. There's been varying pieces of feedback, either through district leadership team or through our leads team, which are our teacher leaders. And so we've been engaging with those folks. We've been talking to our classified staff. Whenever I have an opportunity to talk with them, we sat with the bus drivers a couple of times, and because they had questions about what their responsibilities are going to be on Mondays. Our kids, we've gathered feedback from them through those climb committees that I mentioned earlier. And then in January, we did a series of listening sessions with parents where, we shared the plan and listened to what their concerns were. Some community members showed up, some parents showed up, and they gave us good pieces of feedback. One of them was that they'd like to have another listening session, around January, February next year. That's no problem. We can schedule that. There was some feedback about the child care plan, that we made some adjustments on that. There was some feedback on the types of assignments, because I think the important thing to know is that Monday is still an instructional day. So, kids may not physically be present on campus. Some may. The ones that need extra help, we're going to bring in. Our secondary kids can come in and use Makerspace or come in and get extra help if they need it. But so we'll have limited kids on campus. It won't be a traditional day, though. So our staff is going to be giving kids different things to do, while they're at home. And one of the pieces of feedback was, please don't make it COVID, right? Don't make it like COVID where it's packets and I'm trying to teach my kid this or that. Anything that's happening at home is going to be reinforcing existing skills, and teachers and teacher teams are going to be coming up with what some of those things are that they can do at home. If the listeners go to galianschools.org and they click on blended learning, they can see the whole presentation that I shared with the staff and with parents. And there's 2 slides in there that talks about secondary and elementary level, and what are the different kind of activities and learning experiences that kids, could or should have. And so that was one of the pieces of feedback, right, was just, if we're going to be doing stuff at home, make it meaningful, make it so that we're not teaching our kids, and we're just reinforcing existing skills. So, and then the other piece of feedback was, from parents in the community was, well, we'd like to see what's happening in the classroom. And so there will be a series of opportunities next school year where we're essentially going to have like an open house, but it'll be during the day. And people will be escorted around by staff members to just come into our schools and see what's happening in our buildings, with authentic learning experiences, with project-based experiences. One of the things I noticed, Marcia, in our listening sessions was in order for me to get to why we're doing this in the first place, I had to explain to everybody what school was today, because everyone walked in with their own experience of what they think school is, and it's very different than what we've all experienced growing up. And so I just had to explain to them, well, why do we have so many teachers out of the classroom that's generating that $320,000 bill? Well, a lot of it is because of state mandates, because we have to do this training or that training, or we have to do it by this date or that date. A lot of it is because I got to pull somebody out for an IEP meeting, or some other type of meeting that we're required to have, and that kind of blew everybody's mind. Like, really, you got to do all that stuff? Yeah, we got to do all that stuff, and we're losing a lot of money in the process. Teachers are losing contact time with kids in the process. Like, yeah, we're taking some hits along the way, to the extent that maybe we need to just completely rethink how we do school. And so once I was able to explain to them what school was kind of about, then we were able to have a more productive conversation about why we're moving in this direction, or at least piloting why we're moving in this direction. And then it started to make sense a little bit more, right? When you and I were in school, screen time wasn't a thing. We didn't have to worry about phones. We didn't have to worry about social media. We didn't have to worry, our kids, and there's research out there, the children of today, this generation, are under more stress and have more anxiety, in large part because of social media, because of access to the internet than ever before. And so when we're telling teachers you need to have engaging lessons, they're up against TikTok and Snapchat and whatever else is out there that kids are engaged with. And you mean to, like, as a recovering social studies teacher, I'm supposed to talk to you about World War II or the New Deal or something. And, I can't compete with TikTok, right? I'm not going to be up there dancing and singing and whatever else. But if you give me some time, I might be able to think of some really cool projects that we can do. And even better, if I can do those without technology and get kids talking to each other and get kids talking to me, why wouldn't I do that? But I need time to figure that out, right? And if I can reach out to a community, one of the things that Mr. Juncker did is, he took his kids to see a city council session. I think it was either this semester or maybe last semester, like taking kids to places and seeing things in action. That was awesome, right? And it didn't involve a screen. It didn't involve technology. It didn't involve him up lecturing, right? They actually saw people in action doing stuff. So that's the kind of the goal. How cool would it be for our chemistry classes to be able to go and take a tour of the water treatment plant, right? Because that's cool stuff that goes on there. And it's all chemistry, and there's some really good people that work there. Go meet them. Go let them share their experiences with our kids so they can see in real life this is what's happening in your community, literally down the street. And it doesn't involve TikTok.
Yes. And I will say the kids were involved in that council meeting and asking questions. So
yeah,
there was an interaction there too.
Right.
And I loved talking about going to different places in town, such as the water treatment plant. There have been people who are business owners and would have said they would love to have
Absolutely.
kids come in and
Right.
learn tools of the trade, so to speak, and perhaps that might even get them to come back into our community
Yeah.
or stay in our community.
Yeah.
So the possibilities seem endless.
They do, but you know what? We got a staff of really creative, really, really good folks, and they're going to do some pretty amazing things. And that's the part for me. I know they're going to do amazing things. I don't know what those are going to be just yet, but I've worked with these guys for 3 years. I know what they can do, and I've been doing the education game for about 20 years now. We have some really special educators. We have some people that can do amazing things. Like I said, I just need to get out of their way, right, and give them the tools they need. A good paycheck is always nice, right? But being treated like a professional, being respected, being given the time and the tools to do what you need to do, that pays dividends far beyond a really good paycheck. And that's the idea.
And people just want to be heard too.
Absolutely, yeah.
All around, to be heard, seen, to be welcomed, and that sounds like what's been happening.
It's different. We haven't done that sort of thing around here, Marcia. So it's unique for some of our people to have those experiences. But it's just what you do. If you're a good person, you treat people well.
The old golden rule.
Yeah, that's it.
How will this 4-day week affect extracurricular activities, if at all, homework expectations, and support services for students?
Yeah, there really wouldn't be any change. So Monday's still an instructional day, so we're still going to have practices after school, extracurriculars happening after school. We may actually see an uptick in that because of the way we're running our busing for our secondary students, particularly at the middle school. They may collect kids around the community, bring them here for, in that like traditional after school hours, bring them here maybe an hour before practice, let them do some work, and then before they move on to the actual practice. That's middle school is always a tough area for us in the athletics space because unlike high school kids are kind of mobile. They'll figure out their own transportation. Middle school kids aren't as mobile, so they're usually relying on mom and dad or a parent or guardian to help get them to school or from school. So if we can get them here, keep them here, let them do some work, make sure they're maintaining their athletic eligibility, getting those missed assignments in, those kind of things, then that should be helpful as well. In terms of support services, our IEPs, our 504s, if anything, the Mondays are going to help provide some time for our special ed teachers to be able to more intentionally plan with our regular ed colleagues. There are minutes associated that we have to fulfill. There's different ways that we can fulfill those minutes. But again, giving our teachers time and space to figure that out is the goal here. I don't see much change in the student services side of things. If anything, I see kind of improvement in the quality of what it is that we're doing with kids.
When you mentioned transportation, my mind fleeted to the change in electronic scooters, bikes. Yeah. Is there anything you want to mention about that?
The board implemented that change to our personal transportation device policy after our tragic passing of one of our students. And so we've taken steps to kind of train our kids in grades 3 through 8. That seems to be the target of just how do you use electronic scooters appropriately, how do you use e-bikes appropriately, bicycles appropriately. The reality is that these are devices that are really, really powerful, and we have kids that physically may not be able to harness that power. And so we have kids zipping around, in Heisey Park, in town, on campus. They're not paying attention to their surroundings, they're not wearing helmets, they're not signaling, letting people know when they're trying to make a left or a right. And it became a situation where it was just not tenable for us to allow kids to bring those things onto campus. A bicycle, fine, with a helmet, and we've done helmet fittings here. And I think we have a wait list because we ran out of them when we brought in the group to do the helmet fittings. Those are fine, but the e-bikes, that can go up to 20, 30 miles an hour with a kid who's 90 pounds on the back of it, that just doesn't make any sense to anybody. And we were the driver for that. Kids were zipping through Heisey Park and going through town on their way to school. So if we just tell people, don't bring that stuff to school, that at least resolves a portion of it. And so that's the idea. I'm all about options for kids, but I want to make sure that these are safe options. And at this juncture, we've just seen so much unsafe behavior, and then we don't have the staff to adequately police our entire campus. And certainly in town, we have no authority. So it just made sense for us to educate our kids and limit the types of transportation they can bring onto campus.
Did I see something somewhere that the health department also has helmets?
I believe so.
Through a grant, but this is in addition to what the school has already?
Yes, we sourced the helmets through another program. Our family engagement coordinator, Jessica Berger, was able to work with some contacts to be able to bring those in-house. But yes, I also believe the health department has a stash available as well.
I believe we touched on this a little bit. What's the timeline for rolling out the 4-day school week, and what steps will be taken to evaluate its effectiveness?
Good question. So the timeline, we're already in the middle of it. So we've been having that conversation since March of last school year, and that was a conversation with the board. We had been talking to another school district, 2 other school districts, one in Kentucky and one in outside of Cincinnati, about the potential and the possibilities. And so we started taking steps to make that a possibility. Things really ramped up in the fall, where we started talking about, what are the different moving parts, transportation, special education, classroom assistance, curriculum, all of those different pieces that we've talked about today. And then we unveiled that plan to our staff in December before Christmas break. And then we had a larger conversation with our parents and then the community in January. And so that was those listening sessions, and we took that feedback. And then we revealed the district calendar, in the spring. So that's available on the website as well. And that's it. That's the timeline. So, the calendar is out. People can go to galionsschools.org. They can see that presentation that I mentioned under blended learning. But then also our district calendar is there as well, and all of our Mondays are shaded in blue, signifying that we'll have limited kids on campus. So, and then the timeline is moving forward. We're going to be checking in with all of our different teacher leader groups, and then monitoring all of those metrics that I mentioned before to just kind of see how things are going and tweaking whatever we need to fix along the way.
Thank you, Dr. Hartmann. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think there's so much positive momentum. I think this podcast is one way of it. I think, some of the other things that are going on in and around town. I think there's a lot of good positive movement and a lot of momentum. You know, Galion can be a really, really special place, and it has such deep roots and such rich history. And I feel like just the last couple of years we're on the upswing, and it's all about mindset. You know, you've mentioned that a couple of times. You know, the golden rule, and you know, treat others as you want to be treated. And it's easy to get sucked into the cranks and the social media nonsense, and everybody has an opinion about whatever, you know. But at the end of the day, you know, this is our town. We live here, and we can choose to make it better. Or we can choose to complain about it, but you know, the complaining about it doesn't seem to really be effective because people have been doing it for decades, and nothing really significant has changed. So maybe it's time to change your approach.
Love it, love it. Music to my ears and to my heart. And
Absolutely.
I see an upswing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
But I appreciate the time, and thanks for the invitation today.
well, thank you. Some of you may be familiar with the CAP program, Civil Air Patrol, and has been hugely successful. I'm hearing a lot of positive things about this program. I talked with Colonel Hartmann about that, and I'm leaving that out of this episode, but putting it in later on this week so you can hear about this opportunity program that's taking place at Galion Middle School. Thanks for joining us at Galion Rock and Roar, your positive podcast for all things positive happening right here in Galion, Ohio.